It's about history. It's about preservation. It's about sense of place here on Eastern Long Island. With Esperanza Leon, I'm Irwin Levy, and this is Our Hamptons. Esperanza.
Irwin.
Okay.
Greetings.
Not as breathy as part one of 1957 Fabulous Hamptons, but
Gosh,
breathy.
I should have really aimed for that though, because we'll touch on a breathy subject in this episode.
The breathy subject will come the further east we travel.
That's right.
And
part two of
the Fabulous Hamptons, 1957. Still can't wrap our arms around the fact that this was a 1957 Sports Illustrated article, but whatever. Horace Sutton, thank you, Mr. Sutton. It was really part one of this. Was
travel writer extraordinaire. I mean, for Sports Illustrated, okay. I mean, it doesn't mention it in his obituary, but
we can't figure it out. We're giving up figuring it out, but that's okay. We're going with it because it was really entertaining, and we're not going to really rehash it because this episode, we just aired it. This is going to be part two. We basically divided it into territories. Part one, to just recap briefly, basically started in West Hampton and Quogue and worked itself out. Primarily, the episode was dominated by Southampton.
Correct.
But we sort of moseyed a little bit and skirted into Wainscott where we left off. And interestingly, Esperanza, very little in the towns between Southampton and Wainscott, if you recall.
It's so interesting that it should land this article in Wainscott. I mean, it was a destination in 1957, it would seem.
It was out of this world.
Correct. Yes, exactly.
It was out of this world, but incredibly, and again, Esperanza, a point we've made over and over in Our Hamptons over the past couple of seasons. Yes, Southampton, yes, East Hampton, but boy, Watermill, Bridgehampton, Sagaponack, just farmland that there. Horace Sutton, a travel writer, did not elaborate on those areas at all.
At all. No.
All. But moving into East Hampton proper, as Mr. Sutton did after departing Wainscott, where, if you recall, we were discussing the 475 to 875 steak that you broiled yourself at Out of This World.
I mean, I know we did this already, but I'm just so stuck on how he describes the decor of this place.
I knew you were going to go back there.
That really
made an impression of you.
It just does, because it's such a picture of sort of a local bohemia. I don't know how else to describe it, where the decorating motif, he writes, which includes at some juncture or other pink brick, Grecian heads, Japanese flags, and fishnet, is probably early Martian.
That's
thus out of this world.
It made an impression on you during the episode.
I want this place here now.
Oh my gosh! Hey, everything old is new again. It is. Everything is retro, right? I mean,
yeah.
But he goes now, getting into East Hampton proper. And he discussed that 875, broil it yourself. How, and this place is still here. Now we're going back 65, almost 66 years. How that 875 will scarcely purchase an entree at the Hedges Inn, which, Esperanza, now I didn't know this. Apparently that was a branch of New York's Pavilion.
Which I'm not familiar with.
Nor am I.
Okay.
Nor am I, but
it sounds very officious.
It really does. Again, making it with that New York East Hampton connection, even though so many years ago. But I love Mr. Sutton's description how the overpaid are overfed an exquisite assortment of French preparations in a setting which, with its greenery and soft tree lights, is a bread of a bistro in the. All right, Esperanza, I'm going to give it a whirl, although I may reach out to you to clean it up. The Bois de Boulogne.
Your French is just magnifique, Irwin.
Really? Not bad?
Le Bois de Boulogne.
Oh, now that was that was better. Thank you for that. Thank you for cleaning it up. The only thing I can liken it to is when one of my grandchildren is eating an ice cream cone and I say, can I have it to clean it for you as I eat half of it so it doesn't drip all over that. So thank you for cleaning that up. But dinner will run about $20 a person. That was real money. I'm going back 65 years, $20
for sure.
a person. And it's the only restaurant in the United States where the waiter can carry $80 of food in one hand. Now here, this really sort of says it when he describes the Hedges. Run by a diminutive, and we've all seen this kind of maitre d', right?
I remember this from my childhood, in fact, like this kind of individual. So
right, like just
so vividly.
Yeah, like, and I've even like the Pavilion in New York, this diminutive, unsmiling Frenchman named Henri Soulet, whose ample girth and dour mien seemed to indicate that he may quite well have been nourishing on his own food and paying up on his own checks. Like we've all seen this guy, with the attitude, like a bad attitude.
Yeah.
Which I guess was part of the whole experience of going to a place like this.
Definitely. And it's definitely not something that you will see today.
No.
It's not hip.
No. It really isn't.
Everything is hip these days. You know that, right? Hip and upscale.
Hip and upscale.
This was just conservative and upscale.
Yeah, this was just, conservative, like the guy with, the maitre d' would sneer at you, that whole thing. But, again, he elaborates a little more, if you can pass Soule, you're getting into, now here he gets into whole confines of East Hampton, and we all know where the Hedges is, it sort of looks right onto the Little Green, the cemetery, the South End Cemetery opposite. The approach delights the eye, a reed-fringed, elm-shaded pond. He's talking about Town Pond here, obviously. And beyond that, the sloping South End Cemetery. Good description here, actually, Esperanza.
He's really, an excellent writer. It
really is an island between two roads, because it is going between Main Street and James Lane. It really is a beautiful description.
And what is so amazing, it's still this way.
That's correct.
Really, apart from having two guys constantly weeding the pond these days of its algae bloom, right. It really does look the way he describes it, the cemetery with the wild tiger lilies, and it's exactly that way still. And boy, do we have to thank the Ladies Village Improvement Society and past generations of village government for that.
I'm totally down with doing that. And, because I often marvel, and, this is something we've spoken about, Esperanza, on prior episodes of Our Hamptons, like, standing in front of Mulford Farm and either looking, it didn't matter which way you looked, in front of you, behind you, that vista is really pretty much unchanged.
Yeah, for the most part. You'll see a crop of some new roofs, but it's definitely right. The essence is still there. Yeah.
But especially when, again, that South End Cemetery, looking across that, really extraordinary. Really a miracle of preservation, and we're so grateful for it. Mr. Sutton, however, Esperanza, does continue talking about how the artists came in the 1870s, the gray shingle houses, all of the cultural overtones in East Hampton. the summer theater crowd. And again, this is fact. I mean, John Barrymore was here, Wallace
Right.
Lee, Irvin Cobb, other theater people, Alfred Leo Gray Jr., Robert Dowling, Paul Osborne, Robert Montgomery. I have to say, Esperanza, though, I love this part. How after the show, they would go across, and it's still there, to the 1770 house, serving steak, shrimp, and hamburger sandwiches in the cupboard room. Esperanza, are you aware of the cupboard room? I mean, I never heard that before.
Nope, not. I cannot say that I am, but definitely I am familiar with the telephone booth bar in the basement.
Okay.
Because it is so tiny. I think it seats 3 people, if maybe 4. It's such a fun. I love that basement though. In the 1770.
I admit now I'm sort of kicking myself that in the 34 years I've been in East Hampton now, I've never been in. I went to the 1770 house, like I've been there for dinner and whatnot, but I don't recall ever going into this basement.
Oh my gosh, that's the only part I go to. I never eat upstairs.
I mean, I ate upstairs, and again, I'm not a million times. I was more of an O'Malley's type, especially the one on Pantago, where I was probably served by a teenage Esperanza Leone at some point.
I hope I did a good job.
That's an episode. We actually did touch on that. And we do speculate if Esperanza Leone actually bust our table, but we'll never really know. But Esperanza, so you were actually in this telephone booth bar, which I'm kicking. I have to go now.
You have to go. I mean, if you've ever done a tour with Hugh King, like a lantern tour, there are tours that he's done where I remember one time going into the 1770, and he takes you downstairs because the 1770 was, I think it was kind of like used as a part, like a boarding house for the students of Clinton Academy.
Oh my goodness.
And so, but downstairs is this beehive oven. And so one side of the basement, you can see the back of this, it's like the fireplace of this oven.
Oh my gosh.
And then the other side has this hearth of a, huge fireplace. And opposite the fireplace is this telephone booth bar.
Wow.
But it's just such a delightful place. I mean, here we are like doing an advertisement for 1770 house, but it is part of the historic district. It is
no question
a historic inn.
Esperanza, it's related. We're doing an article that's 66 years old.
Yeah.
And they're talking about this, and so it was there then.
It was there
before then.
It's there. Yeah. It's there now.
And it's there now.
Fairly
super
unchanged.
Cool.
Yeah.
Super cool. Super cool. So Mr. Sutton continues, we're still in East Hampton. Oh, and don't worry, we're going to get into the Bohemia soon, but maybe we'll
just a tad.
Maybe we'll hear that breathy voice come back, but maybe, I don't want no pressure on Esperanza for that. But so we're talking about he's talking about, the board chairman who, this is stuff we've touched on certainly in prior episodes of East Hampton, how the board chairman live in East Hampton too, particularly Lily Pond Lane, the magnificent homes there. And they play largely at the Maidstone Club, another place we've spoken about numerous times in our Hamptons. But I'm going to give it in Mr. Sutton's very poetic prose. They play largely at the Maidstone Club, where from the headquarters in a large weather-beaten shingle clubhouse, which it is, the view gives out landward to the club's own golf course, or seaward to the beach club and its string of cabanas. 23 grass tennis courts, an open-air pool, a great white ballroom where Maidstone members dance 8 times a summer under chandeliers strung with fake flowers and strings of crystal beads.
The fake flowers really, really got me, though. I have to say, the fake flowers just didn't speak wealth.
I've
I
seen,
mean, had he said silk flowers, I would have been much more.
and you know, it's funny. I've seen these fake flowers on display in places that you would think didn't have them. And again, this is 66 years ago. Maybe the Maidstone is no longer doing this.
I don't know. Fake flowers are back. There are all
It's,
sorts of displays. The Maidstone, the Maidstone, former Maidstone Arms on across from the pond now is strung with fake flowers. I don't know. Maybe it's a thing again.
and also a place I walk and trespass on the grounds quite often because it's right near my house. When I go walk by Cece on 3 Mile
Oh, do
Harbor,
they
the
have
old
fake flowers too?
total fake flower.
Yeah,
And like
there's something now. There's
it's like,
something
oh
with
yeah,
that.
maybe it is a thing. I mean, to me, it's sort of like I don't get it. I mean, I doesn't really juxtapose with what they're going for. But hey, what do I know? I mean, maybe it is a thing. I don't know. Maybe millennials like it. I don't know. And again, we can't speak to whether the Maidstone members are dancing 8 times a summer anymore, Esperanza. I don't
I
know.
don't think anybody dances anymore.
Wow, how another famous Esperanza Leon segue. I really wasn't even thinking in terms of that, but it's amazing how all of these subjects, Esperanza, I always continue to marvel at it. This is also happening organically. We weren't planning on this, but again, it is something we've touched on how nightlife, by and large, not that prevalent anymore. Um, you know,
Yeah, we had it, in the first part of our conversation, the previous episode, we it was about these parties at
right.
homes that would go on until dawn, right? Until
That's completely true. And
the wee
again, part of
hours.
it, I mean, again, we're not going to go down this road. It's something we've discussed in prior episodes, but yes, we East Hampton, Southampton don't really have sewers in the downtown district. They're limited into the wet uses, blah, blah, blah. Sag Harbor does more nightlife, whatever. Um, so again, to Esperanza's point, that's why in Southampton, particularly, we heard so many of those stories with the private parties going on. But Esperanza, I'm excited to move into this, albeit it's not all that big a part of it, but
No, and not so much an unknown part of it, but as we move farther east.
we are moving farther east to, as Mr. Sutton says, how the town ramparts, like that description, that's very, very funny, have been, and I love the way he phrases this, Esperanza, have been, and I quote, breached.
Reached. Yeah, this was the early incursion.
This was the, right, exactly,
It was
the early,
early Hollywood.
early Hollywood, we're not going to, not present day of so much of entertainment where we have all sorts of entertainment now as we have movie directors, film, hip hop, musicians, anything and everything. But Mr. Sutton is talking more about how it was breached, again, late 1950s, by television writers, directors spilling over into the neighboring community of Amagansett. Esperanza, come on. How much do we love this phrase? God, this guy can write. We got to give him that. Sort of a hive for bohemians, where the colony has been joined for the summer by the Arthur Millers, and it was Arthur Miller with Marilyn Monroe. If, like other Hampton visitors, they first came to look and then returned to build, the arty ones can probably be counted on to turn out imaginative abodes. Get a load of this. That zoning laws and pure local horror would prevent in, say, Quogue or Southampton.
But it's so interesting that it should go from this mention of the Arthur Millers, which was their 1957 stay in Amagansett, where they actually did retreat to a property that is now for sale, but a really historic in and of itself property without their having stayed there, which is a converted windmill, right?
That's right.
And so then it goes on to say, these imaginative abodes. But here you have one, a windmill that was turned into a private home.
That's great.
And is now for sale for many millions of dollars.
Right.
And hopefully will be preserved because there's nothing protecting it. Oh, and that's just an aside.
Right. But again, touching on how the local horror would prevent it and when they're referring to Quogue, I'm assuming they're referring to the incorporated village of Quogue, and which has always had sort of that kind of reputation in Southampton as well. But again, we're going to continuing on here, how the artists, they cluster and come the weekend in an Amagansett brew house, whatever, called the Elm Tree. And Esperanza, did you know much about the Elm Tree in an Amagansett? Because again, there's another one of those things, not a ton of information on it.
Yeah, no, I'd heard of it. There seems to be an elm something out here, both in Southampton and East Hampton. And I do have heard of this one, but not familiar.
Right.
It was before my time.
It was before our time, but apparently this was sort of, again, like sort of a bohemian outpost, if you will. It was attracted, the Abex artists that were out there, at the time came from their Houston Springs, or as he puts it, east of East Hampton's Eden. And we're going to go back to we're going to go back to and bring in Evan Frankel in a minute here, but just to sort of wind down how Mr. Sutton talked about how there was surfless bay swimming safe for children in the quietude of Gardiner's Bay, where an writer, an avant-garde artist, or somebody strictly with moderate vision can look across to the curving arm of Long Island and see the stacks and steeples of Promised Land. And interestingly, Esperanza, this is sort of where this article ended. No mention of Montauk at all.
Yeah, no, I know. It's so interesting. It just like it skipped right over what you mentioned, Bridgehampton Watermill.
Right.
It was just, I guess, the highway lined with stands selling corn and clams, right?
Apparently, it wasn't worth a mention. He touched, as I, briefly, this was sort of where the article wrapped up. And again, just not saying he was casting aspersions at Montauk. I don't think he was, but it was just interesting how he sort of ended it at Promised Land, which only touched on in a sentence, really. Didn't get into the fish factory, didn't touch on any of that, but just touched on the vistas and how it was sort of the looking across from vantage points on Gardiner's Bay, particularly in Springs, you saw it was like an arm, Promised Land, you could see from those vistas. But I think we should wrap up this article, this story, this Fabulous Hamptons 1957, with someone really prominent in that day, in that era. And Esperanza, that was Evan Frankel. Occupied a carriage house, really like a very old Tudor style house at the time, about on Hither Lane.
Yep, exactly.
And he spoke about how built the swimming pool on that house with a foundation within the foundation of the main house, Greek statuary.
Yeah, because I think the house had burned down, so what he did was repurpose the foundation, and it became this very unique swimming pool.
Right. And it even talks about it here, how Greek statuary tucked into the niches of red brick walls around the pool, greenery growing out of the old sewer pipe painted white. you know, bathers crunching mulberries from a fertile tree with their bare feet, and a cascade tumbling from boulders above. The setting is as ripe as old Rome, but Evan Frankel, I mean, had an interesting history, and we're not going to delve too deep. He could be an episode all unto himself, but
Oh, for sure.
Was very active in preservation within East Hampton Village. I don't know if he was on the East Hampton Village Board at the time or was just on the planning board, but I mean, he was pretty active in like suppressing a lot of things that could have happened.
Yeah, I mean, by the sheer virtue of having some wealth that he could invest in properties and, repurpose them as he did his swimming pool, convert them and just maintain sort of the essence and character of the area, along Newtown Lane and so forth, Montauk Highway. And then, of course, as you know, and most people are very familiar with, he was the co-founder with Jacob M. Kaplan of the Jewish Center of the Hamptons on Woods Lane, where they commissioned Norman Jaffe to design this magnificent building, the Grove, right? It's called something.
Right.
Yep. And it's still to this day, I mean, it's such an architectural gem, and it's mentioned all the time in magazines, periodicals, and books.
And just placed where it was really, not at the sort of unofficial or approaching the, obviously the boundary of East Hampton Village is a little bit further to the west.
Yeah, but it's definitely the entrance to East Hampton.
Most people think about it as when you make the turn onto Woods, from Woods Lane onto Main Street.
Yep.
That's really where you feel the heart of East Hampton Village, is the unofficial start, if you will, of East Hampton Village. And honestly, when you look back, Evan Frankel and some of the other founders, the foresight they showed to engage a Norman Jaffe.
Oh, I was just going to say that. I think, because there is an old shingle style building on that property, right?
That's right.
Jaffe had such a sensitivity to this landscape and this aesthetic of the aesthetic of the area, that anything he made, it was contemporary, but it just fit with the context.
Completely true. And I mean, honestly, it was that really for me, and I'm not going to editorialize, I'm just going to offer really just my own personal opinion. That was a gift to the entire community to have, and whether it was a temple, whether it was whatever it was, but to have a Norman Jaffe building. And Esperanza and I were talking about this before we went on air, how we read all the time Norman Jaffe houses left and right just being, I think one recently right next to Cooper's Beach, just leveled. The fact that we have a Norman Jaffe at the entrance, unofficial entrance to East Hampton Village, is a gift for anybody to enjoy. And if you've ever been in, whether you're a member of that synagogue or you've just had the privilege to be in that building, it is a privilege to be in that building. It is just a moving structure, a modern, it's just a beautiful piece of architecture.
It lifts the spirit, I think, it does it in whatever way, you're bathed in it somehow.
Completely. You don't have to be Jewish. You don't have to be a member of that synagogue to feel something when you go in there. It is just such a beautiful, spiritual experience to be there. Just how bright it is and open and light, and just again, I'm not an architect, but that's an example. That is an example. Whatever that he was going for, my gosh, he attained.
Yeah, and it's so tragic that so many Norman Jaffe buildings, residences in particular, have just been demolished left and right, especially in the past even just 5 years, I think.
Yeah, as usual, and it's something that's happened very frequently on our Hamptons. We go from the lightness.
We hit a somber note.
we go from the lightness of the Bohemians and the Elm Tree Inn in Amagansett to reflecting on Norman Jaffe's being victim to a bulldozer.
But
And
this is life, right? And this
that's
is
right.
what is actually to me so captivating about our East End is the variety of characters, like you like to call them, the cast of characters.
That's right.
They're so various and so diverse, including, the Elm Tree Inn in this article mentions the Liss family. I knew the Lisses. I know
Right.
I'm like best friends with a grandson of Joe Liss, so
Right.
and this is that place where you have these encounters and these connections with people. To me, there's no coincidence. It's sort of like a fate, that occurs out here more often than not.
1,000%. And Esperanza, again, something we've both mentioned on more than one occasion, with the challenges we're facing and with the changes we're observing, there's still that sense of place does still exist, and
it's hanging on by a thread, but it's here.
Right. And
we're trying to hold on to it.
We are trying to hold on to it, but it's so gratifying that it is. And, just the fact that you can relay such a personal story, right, as you just did, to sort of really almost tie this entire episode together.
Yeah. I mean, it just, and I'm reading this part about the Elm Tree Inn and the role that Liss has played with all these bohemia, right?
Right.
This cast of artists and writers and so forth, and among them is Eli Wallach and Eli Wallach and Anne Jackson. And
Right.
to connect the two, I was in the Jewish Center in that building by Norman Jaffe for a presentation with Eli Wallach and Anne Jackson.
Wow.
So full circle. I mean, this is again how marvelous this place is, that it's not about having the selfies and this is not what these people preoccupied themselves with. Was true living, and we're so fortunate to be able to have this history that was relayed from 1957 actually continue in so many ways today.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's another theme we continue to touch on in our Hamptons, how whatever the special sauce of this place is, you mentioned, your experience of seeing Anne Jackson and Eli Wallach. I remember the episode we did, with the SAG main set, how all of those writers, the Hamptons literari, just drawn to be here. And, it's the special sauce, Esperanza.
It is. And I mean, if we can even maybe close on this, because Mr. Liss, in talking about the elm tree, he says, the elm tree was open to everyone.
Right.
Gay, straight, white, black. It was a who's who of the art world, show business, and politics.
That's right. And
I mean,
again,
this is, the townies would hang out on weekends and shout and scream at patrons as they were leaving. I mean, all of this is still today.
Such a great point, such an important point, because again, remember, 1957, this was a more conservative place than it is now, yet that existed. The Club Swamp in the 70s existed, and those nightclubs preceding Club Swamp in Wainscott existed. This place opened its arms for everyone. And
it did.
And that's been its history.
Even though in what he says the townies would hang out on weekends and shout and scream at patrons as they were leaving. That wasn't very welcoming, but we all coexist.
That's right. Which, such a great, you never know where we get to end, where an episode of Our Ham, that happened completely organically, but Esperanza is such a great point, and such a great point to end this episode on, because, even back in the day, really, the arms were open for everyone, in this place. And I think I'll leave it there.
Great.
Esperanza, that was
another adventure.
And I have to say, a powerhouse close, Esperanza.
Oh, Well,
You brought it in.
you know,
Comes naturally.
exactly. I'm not rusty yet.
Not yet. Well, anyway,
All
thanks.
right.
That was fantastic.
Lots of fun. Bye, Irwin. Until
Bye,
next
Esperanza.
time.
Thanks so much for joining us. New episodes of Our Hamptons are released every other Tuesday. Find them wherever you get your podcasts.